You're listening to America's Most Challenging Issue, where BahaiTeachings.org interviews community builders across the nation who are inspired by the Baha'i vision of the oneness of humankind. Join us as we explore their work, bringing about racial unity and establishing a more just and equitable society. I'm your host, Masood Olufani. According to the Baha'i teachings, children are regarded as the most precious treasure a community can possess, for in them are the promise and guarantee of the future. A core component of the current plan of action for the Baha'i world community are children's classes, which focus on the moral and spiritual development of the young through prayer, study of the sacred writings, and community service. Abdul-Baha, one of the central figures of the faith, once said, quote, "Every child is potentially the light of the world, and at the same time, it's darkness. The outcome ultimately depends on how they are raised." In a world that routinely diminishes the role of motherhood and far too often squanders the latent potential within our children, the Baha'i faith calls us to regard the young as a sacred trust, who belong not to their parents, but unto God. Our guest today, Bahia Overton, demonstrates in both her professional life and her community service a profound dedication to the spiritual and material well-being of children. As director of Leading for Learning and Equity Initiatives at the Oregon-based Chalkboard Project, a community-based initiative that links philanthropic foundations with the Oregon public school system to improve the educational experiences for all of the state's children. Wow, that's a mouthful. She works with community organizations to highlight and identify ways in which the needs of children can best be served. She is executive consultant for Joy DeGruy Publications, where she assists Dr. DeGruy in researching historical trauma and developing new models and methods for culturally responsive service delivery. With over 14 years of practical experience as a professional in the field of social work, she has served as a therapist, curriculum developer, and culturally specific treatment specialist in several states, with various community-based organizations and government entities. She is a business owner, having launched her own line of personal care and beauty products called Bahia Honey Beauty and Wellbeing in 2005. She also has led a series of spiritual retreats called Summer Solstice along the Oregon coast for Baha'i and non-Baha'i youth of color. In addition, she is pursuing a PhD in social work research, focusing on the experiences of African-American female adolescents in foster care. And if all that isn't enough, she is also a mother of 3 and has been married to her high school sweetheart for 17 years. In other words, the girl is busy. Bahia Overton, welcome to America's Most Challenging Issue. I wanted to begin by asking you about your work on behalf of children. Your community service and your professional practice in many ways focuses on the young. And I'm wondering how that interest developed for you. What was it? A personal experience, that led you to this work, or was it a result of your life as a Baha'i that cultivated this kind of focused engagement?
I think that my childhood was really unique. First, my identity was as a Baha'i kid before it was any other kind of kid. And when I came to the Pacific Northwest from Los Angeles, I was immediately, I became a Black kid. And so my experience as a Black kid in Oregon and not really fitting and not being really connected and feeling less than in a lot of ways was really difficult for me. But I know that my mom was both my parents, my mother in particular, really good at taking bad situations and spinning them for me in a way where I could kind of learn a lesson, but also it kind of promoted some healing for me. I remember one time she said to me, "You need to know that from a Baha'i standpoint, the moment you think you are better than someone else, the moment you exalt yourself over another person, you're actively working against the cause of God." That was so heavy for me as like a 7-year-old. I was like, wow. But it always connected with me the idea that the reason why I was feeling the way I was feeling, like I didn't belong, like I wasn't important, it was because people felt that they were better than me. They were superior to me, that they were cooler than me. They were smarter than me. And so I kept thinking, I changed my frustration and fear of them really more into like, I feel sorry for you, right? Because you're actively working against the God of God. And maybe you don't have a mom or somebody at home who's telling you that you can't be like, that you can't just be this way. And then I, desperately was excited, moved to a school that was predominantly Black, finally my people. And they were like, no, you sound too much like a white girl. Nah. So it was kind of a weird thing. I was back with my people. And then I saw at the same time, lots of kids behaving in a way that let me know that they were not being reinforced either, that they were good enough and that they belonged. Even though there was more Black people there, they still didn't have that comfort level, right? So I went to high school, went to college. I got to college at U of O. It was kind of, it was, I was an interesting Black girl at U of O, and I had a student tell me, there's only 5 of us here who aren't on athletic scholarships, so you can't be retro girl, because I loved all kinds of grunge. That was my thing, like love grunge. And somehow convinced all my friends to fast with me, but that's a whole nother side story. Anyway, when I left there, I went to Fisk University in Nashville, and it was the first time I ever felt like an individual, and I really belonged. And I kept thinking, I've been in all Black environments before and not belong. Why is it that I belong here? And I realized it was because I was being affirmed constantly. I was being expected to behave and to act in a certain kind of way. I was being expected to perform well and to succeed. And I even had a professor tell me he's going to give me an F for any C work I gave him because he knew I was capable of A's. And I was like, this is not right. But it definitely pushed my thinking around excellence. And I started to think, what do people need and what are they robbed of that they don't know that they belong and they have these potentialities? And so at that point, my work and service started going into, how do we affirm children? How do we affirm them and make them feel that they belong enough so that they can start to access their true potential? And so that kind of, in all of my volunteer or social work or time as a therapist, was dedicated to helping children fully access their potential and to actually fully access their nobility. Like you have this, you are gifted with this at birth. You don't have to earn this with anyone, and you don't have to get anyone's permission to be great. And so, so I think that, it starts with the faith, it continues with the faith, but definitely has inspired all the work that I do.
I love that. I love that whole idea of it being something that's intrinsic to you, something that you don't have to earn, but it is something that you're born with. That's wonderful. In contrast to the world, which often devalues the role of educators, the Baha'i faith, it places, a vital emphasis on this process, right? It's essential for carrying forward this ever-advancing civilization. And I wanted to know, how do you internalize this perspective, and does it inform your work?
Yes, I guess for me, it is, you can get educated many ways, I will say. What I've learned in this work that I've been doing in school districts and with school principals and administrators is that the education in school is valued over every other education, right? And the content of what you're learning in school is not even all that valued either. It's just that you go to school, you learn these things, you learn how to regurgitate these things, you learn how to be tested on these things. And how much value those concepts have in your actual life is debatable, right? But there are educational things that are happening in community. There are educational things that are happening in reservations. There are educational things that are happening that don't have value everywhere, but are no less worthy and important. And so I think education itself is a very, very, very important thing. I think we've had a singular narrative about what the best education is, or whose education is the most valuable. But so my work has really been dedicated to pushing the thinking of teachers, of parents, of superintendents, people who impact district culture, then school culture, family culture, right? These are all things that around what is education? I'll give you an example. My daughter is a master test taker. She's a master. Now, I told her when she was very young that she needs to not think like an African-American girl going in to take the standardized test, which we know evidence has shown us is racially biased, okay? But that's not for her to feel defeated. I'm telling you, this is racially biased, which is not fair, and that you don't have to feel bad because it's not biased towards you. But you also come from people who have survived by outsmarting things and systems that try to oppress them. So I want you to think like the test maker. Because in the test maker, what the test maker was designing predominantly white kids to get from this example. So the example mentions jewelry making 5 times, but you think the most important thing is that the mom died at the beginning because you're not thinking like the test maker. So you need to think that way. And then you're empowered. Then you know that you have taken this tool that has been used to potentially oppress you, make you feel less than, and you've used your abilities, your skills to outsmart that system because you're brilliant and perform anyway. I said, and then that becomes evidence. Why did this child not do well and this one did? Because then I can say, because I taught this one these strategies. This one's not smarter than this one, but this one now has the strategies to play this game, which is rigged. So for me, part of it is it builds her up when she feels that she's got tools. She's not defeated because the test is racially biased. She knows it is. That's not the point. That doesn't detract from who she is or her value or her potential. I said, you've got to figure out a way to twist this so that you can demonstrate how brilliant you are. Right? It doesn't prove your brilliance, but you can demonstrate it by using their tool in a different way. And I think when I'm talking to kids in multiple communities, we try to find what is the thing that's most valuable to you and how can you use that to anchor you in how to navigate this field. And then you'll be more, now that's until we can dismantle the inequalities that need to be shifted. I mean, it doesn't need to be a continuously racially biased test. But in the meantime, let's give you the proper attire to navigate this little battlefield here, you know? So, I mean, for me, it's always, I had a professor who called it Mbisa. He was, his father was Zulu and his mother was, I think, Xhosa. So and he said they had this saying that meant to outsmart your oppressors under apartheid. And they would figure out ways to have these triumphs in the midst of this kind of oppressive structure. So I tell my kids all the time, it's a Kukulambisa, whatever it is, you've got to figure it out. And you come from people who are masters at doing that. So
makes me think about 2 things, some of the things you said. One is this whole idea of being a perpetual student, right? In the Baha'i context is that we're all students. So it's this kind of perpetual learning, the posture of learning. And then that other thing about, this notion of outsmarting, these systems of oppression and finding ways to work within, while at the same time building this kind of new civilization. So walking this, this spiritual path with practical feet in a very real way. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that out. Very important. Another key component of the Baha'i approach to the rearing of children is that it is not simply the responsibility of the parents, right? But it's more the responsibility of the entire community, that in some fundamental way, the well-being of the entire society is predicated on how we care for our children. And that's all of our children. Now, we know that the underlying purpose of the Baha'i revelation is the realization of the oneness of mankind. And it seems to me, I was just thinking about this, that there is a link between the idea of communal caring for the young and the realization of this spiritual and material law. And do you see a connection there?
Wow. It's interesting because I don't want to say battle, but in my work and in my communication with my friends, we talked about this kind of, we're all responsible for all of our children. But that also requires that you value all children, you love all children, and you are willing to build a relationship with all children. And I've had this ongoing debate with senators and folks in the legislature here in Oregon around, you keep saying you want to do things that are best for all children in Oregon, and you don't talk to the communities where all children in Oregon come from to figure out what's best for them and their communities. And I look at, when I think about people regarding all children as their responsibility and for us all putting in our share to take care of all children, what I realize is that you have to really be able to fully access your humanity. So when I'm talking to these folks, I'm like, listen, I believe that the truth is that we are all intrinsically connected. That is the truth. That race is a social construct that has been used to create barriers and disparity. right? It's what it is. However, we cannot continue to look at barriers and disparity and think that the way to fix it is just the people in those communities to fix those systems. Everyone has to be together about the fact that we care about all kids. And so we have to value all kids. But if your humanity is caught up in the material and in the non-spiritual, I guess, you start to think, what is going to look good on paper? My efforts on paper that look good, but it's not necessarily connected to my purpose as a human being. That is always my goal in meeting with folks that have historically not excluded that this component from the conversation, is to say, I'm going to give you a chance here to fully access your humanity and to think about yourself and your children and what you want for your children. Because usually people can connect to their love for their own kids, right? How is it then that you can take that love and that faith that you have in the promise of your own child and figure out how you can see that in someone else's child? Like, what will it take for you to see that promise and have faith in that person's ability? And that's the part where I find there's so much disconnect. That's a spiritual problem, is that it's not about even people who are just trying to be racist and oppressive. It's not that. But it's like, if you can't connect to our oneness, then you're not going to be an effective educator. You're not going to be an effective caregiver. You're going to be an effective doctor, because you're not embracing your own humanity fully. So you certainly can't work for all of humanity, no matter how many briefs or equity lenses or documents you put out. It's just not going to happen. They're completely connected, right? Your not only do your words and deeds have to be your adorning, but also your internal belief system has to be in alignment. You know what I'm saying? You can say you're going to serve the community and actually serve the community and not care about the community. So, so I think that the idea that we are all collectively responsible for all of our kids is true. However, how well we do that and how sincerely we do that determines how effective we're going to be.
Wow. One of the profound dimensions of the Baha'i approach to education is that it must be both spiritual and material in nature. And I wanted to know if you could talk a bit about how society is served by taking this approach.
Well, I think first it is to know and then it is to do, right? So you have to, I think when we're talking as Baha'is, we believe that science and religion should agree, for instance, right? That they should not be in discord. And so I always used to think about it when I would explain to my kids is that that science is what you do. So basically it's like the spirit is what you know. You acquire knowledge of the spirit. It's manifest in all of these different ways. And you get the writings or the holy books or whatever. You get all that and you have that. That's what you know. And the science and the education, I guess are what you do with what you know. It's like, so now I know, and what I do with that knowledge determines how other people learn, how other people, I guess, arrive at understanding. So I guess it's. I don't think that they can be separated. I do think that we need to have. I want to go to the next ABS conference because I really want to look at knowledge for the just developing knowledge. There's no purpose for that. Like, I'm so smart, I know all this stuff. You're not going to do anything with that. You're not going to teach anybody else. It means nothing really. But I think how we acquire knowledge and the kind of knowledge that is valued. I think that that's something that's really exciting. I think that when people find something new, it's like my friends who become saved or join the nation, they have this fire in them in the beginning because they've stumbled upon some kind of new knowledge, right? Depending on how they decide to use that or how people in their environments are using that, usually determines how dedicated they stay in the act of doing with that knowledge. And so I think for me as a Baha'i, what I think is always connected is to, because of what we know, I just feel like it's our responsibility to constantly do with what we know. And part of that is creating education. Our doing is educating humanity that there are other ways to, ways to value knowledge, and the science and the health And the wellness that comes from that, I think, is the evidence that creates knowledge for other people. Does that sound too convoluted? I just feel like
no, I'm
okay.
with you. I'm with you.
I sounded like I went all over.
I might be trailing a little behind, but I'm with you. No.
Well, just to be succinct, what I mean is that I think that knowledge, action, and understanding are connected. You can't just have understanding with no action, and you can't act without true understanding. And I think that as human beings, we are supposed to be educators, and whether we like it or not, we're always educating someone, right? To be like us, not be like us, do what we do, don't do what we do. So you can't separate them. But if you want to advance civilization, you have to be doing it with a spiritual understanding and knowledge, right? That then makes itself manifest in material. I guess I don't know what the material thing would be necessarily, but that's what it makes itself manifest. What we believe and what we do with what we believe.
So kind of interdependence, it sounds to me, is what you're saying, between the material and the spiritual, and not, you're right. This kind of interdependence. Yeah, I like that. That's cool. We got it. Awesome. Now, in researching you, Bahia, I was really curious about, these spiritual retreats on the Oregon coast. That sounds pretty cool. And I wanted to talk to you about, you designed this summer solstice, to serve Baha'i and non-Baha'i youth of color. And I wanted to find out why you decided to structure the program this way, and how do you see it serving the needs of these marginalized groups?
I started a Baha'i Youth Workshop because I'd been in the Baha'i Youth Workshop, one that my mom had run for 10 years. I would go back and forth to LA, to the LA workshop, and participate with them all summer long. And then I decided that, just because I didn't have any Baha'i didn't mean I couldn't have a workshop. So I started a workshop that was like 90% people who were not Baha'is. But I would kind of say, do you believe in these different beliefs? Can you promise not to act crazy wearing a Baha'i t-shirt? Then you can join. So I had all these kids doing the race unity dances and equality of men and women stuff. And we would travel over Oregon to do it. And people still come to me, I used to be in his dance group. I'm like, what's really a dance group? But anyway, so I would go to Bosch all the time. And that's where I met, I called all of my, the Baha'is who were like me. All the Baha'is from LA, a lot of Latino Baha'is, Black Baha'is, white Baha'is who were down with Latino and Black Baha'is who came up from LA, where I would go. It was like, these are teens who remind me of my friends in Portland, but who have a central understanding of who Baha'í is. It was a wonderful experience. And so most of my friends that I met there are still my very best friends today. And those are the friends that I called on when I needed help, when I was dealing with things. They would send me quotes over the years, right? As a college student discussing issues of chastity, they were the ones that I was talking to, not my roommate. Okay, so it built in a framework for me, and it kept me active in the community, even though I was isolated in Baton Rouge, or when I lived in Michigan, or when I lived in Nashville. I found those Baha'i community, even though I didn't have Baha'i friends there necessarily initially, because my Baha'i friends kept me connected to something that I felt I belonged. That belonging kept me. And so when I was looking at one of the letters, it was a December something letter, but it was several years ago. I can't remember, but I remember it was a December letter. And it was talking about the fact that the House of Justice wasn't interested in zero-sum evidence, right? Zero-sum evidence around these things that Baha'is were starting and doing. They didn't want to, they basically were some of them weren't a little resistant to the Ruhi process. And so it was saying, we have evidence that this process helps build community. We have evidence. And so whether or not it's your favorite thing or not, if it's a global activity that people are involved in that is fostering community, you can't not pay attention to that. So you might have a great idea, but if it's zero-sum evidence that it's going to build community, nobody's interested in hearing about that, really, right? And so that stayed in my mind. And when so I sent my son to Bosch when he turned, I think it was 14 or so, went to Bosch. He went back 2 years in a row, had a great time, met some great Baha'is. And then they shifted the focus, because Shoghi Effendi actually said that he wanted the Baha'i schools to really be for the communities, not Baha'is, to come to the Baha'i schools. I didn't know that. They've been running them not that way for such a long time that I got very comfortable with that activity. And of course, I'm not going to say don't do what Shoghi Effendi said the Baha'i schools should be. So, of course, I'm going to welcome and embrace that shift. But I have other zero-sum evidence of other ways that the Black people and the Latino people and the Persians that I was connected with as a youth who stayed connected to the faith, I don't see the evidence that any of these other activities have kept them engaged. And so the only thing I have that I know kept me engaged, kept my friends engaged, and almost all of us who had that are very active Baha'is. Our younger siblings who did not have that, I can almost say that in almost every case, are not. So I'm taking that evidence and I said, oh, no longer doing Bosch that way. I understand. I still support Bosch, but I have to do something for my children to give them the best that I have. And the best that I have is by creating an environment where they can foster those friendships that might be able to carry them through this very, very hectic and treacherous world we got going on right now. So what I explained to the parents who I reached out to, basically I first reached out to just my friends I met at Bosch, their kids, right? Because I knew they would understand the goal of what I was trying to do. And I said, this is not to replace a Baha'i school. I think you should still send your children to Baha'i school or send them to a different course of study. When my children go to Baha'i school, the primary focus is study and education, and secondarily building relationships. At the retreat, the primary focus is building relationships, and secondarily we're doing study together. But that is the focus. So I tell the parents, it's a retreat. It's not a Baha'i school. We're going to have Baha'i-inspired material. We are going to do some deepening. We're going to do prayers and meditation. We're going to try to get them back to their spiritual reality and connect with one another on that basis in a safe place where they see plenty of people who look like them, who recognize Baha'u'llah and believe this faith is for them. So it wasn't about being exclusive to anyone else, but it really was about giving them that piece that I know was very core in me staying engaged and connected to the faith. And so that's why I did it. It's really selfishly for my own children to get that. And got a lot larger than I had anticipated. But that's, I mean, that was the goal.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, as we're, this whole idea of the oneness of mankind, this spiritual law that Baha'u'llah has made this central part of his revelation, and the acquisition of that, the realization of that, the materialization of that is going to take a lot of different approaches. And I think one of them, it seems to me, when I was fairly new Baha'i, I attended the Black Man's Gathering, which is a gathering of African-American Baha'is. And it was a really wonderful experience to be in that kind of protective kind of cocoon in safe space, really, right? Because, that notion of the oneness of mankind, it's still, learning to trust that, learning to believe in that, right? It's a process. And it was nice to have a safe space to kind of, to experience that, in a different way. So, yeah, thank you for that. I love that, man. I wish I was a youth. I'd be coming to Oregon, man. That sounds so cool.
Look, we have adult volunteers. So we always have a group of kids. You can always come and join us one time.
There's no dye in the world to cover all this gray to get me to look like a youth and it's done. It's over with. But maybe as an adult supervisor or something. I don't know. It's always a way. Always a way. Now, you're a woman of multiple interests, Bahia. In addition to the various roles we've talked about so far, you're also a dancer, okay? Oh. And I'm not talking about, the Soul Train kind at the club. You can probably do that too, okay, because you went to FISC. That's a prerequisite. I know about the HBCU experience. But, you perform with several professional companies. You're currently working with Sebe Khan. Am I saying that right? Which means Serious Sound, which is an African dance and drumming ensemble based in Portland, Oregon. And implicit in dance, in particular African dance, it seems to me, is this interrelationship between movement and spirit, right? That in some way, the dynamic force of intentional, purposeful movement generated by spirit can be this kind of transformative experience. And I wanted to know, how does your life as a dancer inform the other aspects of your life?
Wow. It's funny. Because I didn't think about it that way, but you're right. I was thinking about the spirit between the drum and the music. And so I was a modern dancer in college. That was a little bit different. Modern is interesting. But I will say that the other day, I was in an intensive facilitator training because I'm doing some facilitation of some equity conversations. And so one of the things that they had us do in the training, they said, we want you to stand up and tell your story. And I want you to stand and you've just met us. You've brought us together to talk about shifting our agency's equity policy or something. And you got 5 minutes to kind of why you came to this work, why you, right? I was like, oh, wow. Well, anyway, apparently, however I was standing later at the end of that conversation, they kept saying, you just look so strong. And I was like, I kept thinking, was I doing this? Like, what was I doing? What do you mean? But I think it was and one of the women said, are you a dancer? And I said, yeah. And she said, you could tell you were a dancer by how you were standing. I wasn't, I don't know what I was doing, but however I was standing. And I think dancers a lot of times really are always trying to figure out how to balance their weight, right? Find their center in movement. And so I think when I was trying to center myself in why I in this work, whatever the stance was, I still don't know what they were talking about exactly, but whatever that stance was, I think I was trying to find my center, both in my heart, in my mind, but clearly in my body, I was centered in the stop. So they were like, you weren't moving. Everybody was walking around talking. You were like literally anchored in the floor. And I thought, that is what I think my attraction to dance is always that. I feel like I'm a creative person. I'm always thinking outside the box, which can be problematic. I'm always thinking about how to make the lines a little bit fuzzier, right? So I think I look for things that center me, that require focus and attention so that I can be more intentional around all this creative energy that's flowing around me all the time. It's like, center yourself and organize your thoughts and be intentional and see the end in the beginning, right? See the end in the beginning. And so that's kind of, I think, where dance is always, it's beautiful. It lifts my spirit for sure. But I think it's very centering for me. And
It's wonderful. It's wonderful how the arts can, inform us in so many ways. Me being a visual artist and an actor, I find that to be, there's so much expression in terms of the rest of my life that is informed by my artistic practice. So I hear you. I hear you right there with you. We're just about out of time. This has been a lot of fun, but I wanted to ask you before we go, are you hopeful about humanity's future? And if so, what is the source of your hope?
We had this line we had to stand on in this equity training. People who thought that they could solve racism, people who thought that racism was permanent, right? And people who just didn't know. So I'm the only person on the side that said racism can be fixed. And I'm the only person of color and I'm the only person over there, period, right? And so I think the facilitators were a little bit surprised that there was a person of color over there on that side. But what I told them was, I said, there is the truth in the world and there's everything else. And do I think that I will necessarily, as my mom likes to say, hit the tape in this race? Probably not. But I am going to do my due diligence to pass the baton effectively. And I think the more that we're committed to passing the baton, ultimately, we are going to reach our goal of finding the truth. And I think that if there's anything that impedes that progress, it's going to be so terrible that then we don't even have to work towards it. It will be so evident, right? So either way, you will come to the understanding of the truth, whether you're brought to the truth brought down by on your knees, or by continuously passing on the baton, right? I tell my kids that all the time. I'm like, if you think about our ancestors and the ones, this has been 400 years, since 2019, 400 years of slavery, or since slavery, the first slaves came here, 400 years, and you think about that person who was enslaved in the middle, 100 and something years in, and everything they've ever known or ever will know is going to be pain and suffering. And they didn't all commit suicide. So there had to be birthed there some hope for future generations. And so when I talk to my children about our potential, I'm like, I'm already in that space of hope. I'm fulfilling those hopes and dreams. I'm in that fulfillment place. So I don't have a choice but to hope and look forward. I don't even have that level of oppression happening to me. How dare I not pass hope to my children, but hope with service, right? Faith in acts. So I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of faith, and I have a lot of love. And, you know, love can't dwell in a heart possessed by fear. That's what my understanding is. So, so that's where I am. Is I'm fearlessly optimistic about us at some point attaining the truth, even if I'm not around to see it.
Wow. Well, you know, I just want to say what a joy it's been to talk to you today, Bahia. It's been amazing. Thank you for your hope, for your advocacy for our children. Thank you for your courage, your intelligence, and your commitment. It's just so wonderful to speak with you. You've been listening to America's Most Challenging Issue. I'm your host, Masood Olufani. And remember, regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. From the Baha'i Writings, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time.